Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. Now in today's video, I'm going to show you how to draw and completely customize your own kawaii little monster in a bottle. And just a little sneak peek, there is going to be a course and brush giveaway in this video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But until then, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. Now, just a quick note before we start, I'm going to be working in Procreate for this demo, but you can follow along with any kind of software of your choice as long as you're familiar with basic tools such as paintbrush, color selector, layers, and maybe masks if you want to make it a little bit easier on yourself. So really here, you do not need to use specifically Procreate for this video, although again, this is what I personally will be using. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, this video is entirely customizable, so you can change the colors, you can change the shape of the bottle, the shape of the monster. I'm going to show you or give you tips along the way on how you can do that. But if you want to make it a little bit easier on yourself, you could go ahead and use the same color palette I am using. It is free, you can download it from the description below. So you can either download that, pick your own colors, or I'm also going to add the Xcode right here on the top of the video. Now, the first thing you can customize in this tutorial is the shape of your canvas. I'm going with square because that's what's nice to post on social media, and I'm going with a dimension of 3000 per 3000 pixels. Now again, you can use whatever else you want depending on the final result you desire. One thing I would recommend though is making sure your piece is big enough so that when you zoom in, you can add details without them looking super pixelated. So again, I'm going with 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels. If you're not sure, that is what I would recommend using in your case as well. So the first thing we're going to do is very simple. We're just going to set the background color. Now, if you're working with Procreate, there's always a background color layer that comes within any canvas that you create. So you would just go ahead and select that. If you are working in a different software, just create a new layer, add it at the bottom of everything, and rename it to background. Now again, since I'm working at Procreate, I'm just going to select the one that comes with my canvas. And here, this is the first, I guess, important decision you have to make in terms of your color palette. So the color we're going to use for the background can be whatever. It needs to be dark though, and it needs to be, or at least I would recommend it being the same color or the same family of color that you want your monster to be. So I want my monster to be blue, so I'm going to pick a really dark blue for the background. So if you're working with my color palette, we're going to pick it at the bottom of this blue column here, this kind of dark blue. Now, as you can see, I said it's going to be a really dark color, but it's not that dark. It's probably a little bit less than half in terms of the brightness. But one thing that is important is to make sure that color is not super saturated. So you want to make sure it is not a super vibrant version of whichever color you're using. It should have quite a bit of gray within it. And from there, we're just going to draw the basic shape of the bottle. Again, this is something you can completely customize. I'm going to go with a little top that then narrows and do this kind of bubble shape, which is going to match the shape of my monster. You could have something very tall and narrow and maybe kind of pointy and angular. You could have a square jar, you could have a mason jar kind of situation, really whatever you want here. So this is something very easy to customize, and it's a really good starting point to making this piece your own. Now we're going to draw this glass shape on a separate layer, obviously, because right now we just have the background. So go ahead and create a new layer and rename that new layer to bottle. Now for the bottle, we're actually going to just use white. So you can just go ahead and select pure white. And if you want your bottle to be perfectly symmetrical, you could use some sort of a symmetry tool like Drawing Assist in Procreate or a mirroring tool in a different software. I personally want my bottle to be a little bit wonky, so I'm going to freehand it. But again, if you want to have it perfectly symmetrical, just go ahead and use any kind of mirroring option you have. Now, in terms of brushes in this video, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know exactly what I'm about to say. I'm going to give you a few different options. The first option is going to be free brushes that come with Procreate, and you can use them and get really good results. I'm also going to do my best to give you ways to find similar brushes in other software if you're not working with Procreate. And finally, I'm also going to suggest brushes from my Ultimate Illustration bundle. Now, these brushes are not essential at all, but they're brushes that I use in my day-to-day life when I illustrate children's books, so illustrations are not necessarily on YouTube. They're brushes that I made just for that, and people seem to really like them, so I'm selling them now. Now, if you want to check them out, they will be linked in the description below, and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people, but again, they are not essential at all. Now, especially to map out the shapes, we're just going to start with the most basic round brush you have in your software. So a brush that doesn't have any feathering, any texture, just a circle. So if you're working with Procreate, that would mean going in the airbrushing pack, picking the art brush, and making sure the opacity is at 100%. If you're working in a different software, again, just the most basic round brush you have. And if you do have my illustration bundle, we're going to go in the texture pack and we're going to pick the base round brush. And here again, very simple, all you're going to do is map out the shape of your bottle. Now here, the size of the brush doesn't matter at all. As long as you're able to draw what you want to draw, that's really all that matters. So what I personally like to do is just start with a very rough outline, like this, then filling the outline and reworking it until I'm super happy with the silhouette. It is important to take all the time you need to make sure that silhouette is exactly how you want it to. It's going to make a big difference in the end, and now is the time to do it when we just have one flat, easy color. And if you need to erase at this stage, just set your eraser to the exact same brush you're using to draw your shapes. Great, so once you have your basic shape, feel free to just reposition it if it is not exactly where you want in the canvas. I'm going to put mine in the middle horizontally, but a little bit lower vertically so that I have room later to add a little bit of a stopper. Awesome! So from there, we're going to keep building the basic shapes just using flat colors on separate layers. And it's going to look a little bit crazy for the first chapter of the video while we're just, again, piling up all those flat shapes. But in the next few chapters, we're going to start adding effects and we're going to start adding gradients, lights, and shadows, and it's really going to come to life. But for now, it is definitely a case of trusting the process. Now, the next thing we're going to draw, if you do want to have one, is the stopper. If you don't, just skip ahead a little bit and we're going to draw the plants, but I think a stopper is a really good way to add a little bit more color to the piece and also make it feel like the bottle is its own little ecosystem. So if you do want a stopper, just go ahead and create a new layer above the bottle, rename it to stopper. And here with the same brush, we're just going to go with more of a brown to get that cork feel. So again, if you're working in the color palette, pretty simple. You could just go pick one of those colors, probably either the one on the bottom of the first column or the one at the top of the second column. I think I'm going to go with the one at the top of the second column. As you can see, it is still pretty much middle of the way in terms of both saturation and brightness, but here instead of being a purplish blue, it is kind of a reddish orange. And again, the stopper, you could customize the shape, although a stopper shape is a bit more standard than a bottle, I would say. But one thing I would recommend doing is, because the bottle has some thickness, it is not just flat, there is, the thickness of the glass, make sure the stopper doesn't touch the very sides or the very edges of the bottle. So just leave a little bit of a gap. And also remember that if the sides of your stopper are perfectly parallel or angled this way, the stopper is going to fall in the bottle. So it needs to be slightly angled outwards like this. With a slight curve at the bottom and a slight curve at the top. Great, so the next thing we're going to map out from there is just going to be the outline of the monster, and I keep calling it a monster because honestly I have no idea what else it would be, but it's pretty much just a blob. So it's going to be this kind of gumdrop shape for now, and that's really it. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything, rename it to monster. And here you would take a slightly different version of the background color you picked. So I went with a purplish blue. So I'm going to stay in the blue family, but here I'm going to go with more of a green, aqua, turquoise kind of blue. And it's going to be much brighter and much more saturated. So if you're working in the Groovy Portrait palette, honestly, any of these colors on, well, the right square section, any of those works well with that dark purpley blue background. So you could just kind of stray away. I know I said staying with the same family, but you could stray away if you're working with that color palette. That being said, I am not going to stray away. I'm going to stay with, again, the same color family. I'm going to go with this blue right here, which, as you can see, again, quite a bit brighter. It's not that much more saturated, if I'm honest. It's still pretty much middle of the way in terms of saturation. But instead of being a blue that is on the purplish side, it is much more on the green aqua side. And again, you can customize the shape of your monster to be whatever you want. You could have a blob like me, or you could have, I don't know, something maybe with horns, or with ears, or with arms extended, whatever you want. I'm keeping mine super simple because I'm going to add the arms as details on top later. But don't hesitate once more to customize your piece by changing the shape of your blob. Okay, so from there, we're going to draw the inside of the bottle, so the decorative elements. And these elements, you can completely customize them based on what kind of environment you want your monster to be in. So I'm going with this kind of terrarium, but you could go with a winter wonderland, so snow on the ground, snowflakes floating around. You could go with a bit more of a like a fantasy land, so it could be on clouds, so you would just have this cloudy bottom and then clouds at the top. Really, the idea here is just mapping out super cartoonish basic shapes in flat color, and later in the video I'm going to show you how to amp up those shapes using details as well as texture. Again though, I'm going to keep mine as this little terrarium, so I'm just going to start by adding a bit of dirt at the bottom, but again, you could draw something completely different. So just go ahead and create a new layer, this time probably below your monster, so the monster can be resting on whatever is at the bottom of the bottle. And rename that new layer to whatever you want to have at the bottom of the bottle. So in my case, dirt. And right now the bottle we have is completely opaque. But if you want to add white elements, which I am not, but I just mentioned a bunch of elements that you could draw that would be white, you would not be able to see them on top of the fully white opaque bottle. So what we're going to do, we're kind of going to jump ahead a tiny little bit, and we're going to lower the opacity of the bottle layer. Now opacity is in most software, so it shouldn't be too hard to find. To access your opacity slider in Procreate, all you have to do is tap on the little N next to the check mark of one layer, so in our case, the bottle layer. And then you're going to have the opacity slider right here. And here we're going to lower the opacity quite a lot, so probably around something like 10%. We really just want to barely see the outline of the bottle. And once we have that, we're actually going to put the bottle above everything for now. We're going to change that a little bit later, but for now we're just going to put it on top of everything. And then from there, it's going to be much easier. If you have white elements, you can just draw them in and you're going to see them much better. Again, in my case, I want dirt, so I'm just going to go back on my dirt layer. I'm going to pick the exact same brand I used for the stopper, and then I'm just going to use that to draw dirt at the bottom. Now, similarly to the stopper, when you draw the bottom, make sure you leave a little gap at the bottom to take into account the thickness of the bottom of the bottle. And then we're just going to keep going, so keep creating different layers for every different elements we're drawing, and we're just going to once more map out the basic shapes. So again, feel free to do something completely different than I am doing, but if you want to copy what I'm doing, that's totally okay as well. We're going to draw a few little leaves and branches. And here I want to have some leaves in front of the monster and some behind the monster, so I'm going to do exactly that by creating two different layers. One behind the monster that I'm going to rename to branch, and one above the monster that I'm going to rename to leaves. I think I'm going to start with a branch because that's going to help me see the composition a little bit better. So I'm just going to pick my branch layer, of course. And here I'm going to go with a green. Now I don't really have a green, well not really, I don't have a green in my color palette right here, so that's a perfect opportunity for me to show you a really cool feature that comes within Procreate on how, or that can help you pick your own colors and create your own color palettes. So let's say here I want a green that I know is going to work well with my little monster shape. So I'm going to color pick the color of the monster, making sure it is the one that now shows as the selected color. And I'm going to move to the bottom of my color selector menu here to the harmony option. And as you're going to see, it's going to pull up the color wheel right here. And you're going to have on the top left a few different color harmony options that you can flip through until you find that the software is going to show you a version of the color that you want. So for example here, if I flip through until tetradic, I can see the software is showing me a green on the color wheel. And because these colors are suggestions based on the color I have selected, which is one that I already have in my piece, whatever I pick here is going to mathematically work well with my selected color, meaning my color palette is going to be coherent. So let's say here I go ahead and pick this green right here, so that is now the one that is in my color selector. I can then go back into my classic color selector menu, and as long as I don't change the hue, so what we usually call the color, I can change the saturation, so making it a little bit grayer or a little bit more vibrant. And I can change the brightness, so making it darker or lighter, and the color is still going to work well in the palette. So I'm going to go with this green actually, I really like it. And I'm just going to draw a pretty long stem that essentially follows the curve of the bottle. And on that stem, I'm going to add some really thick, round leaves, or oval leaves, I should say. Now once more here, make sure that you leave a gap for the bottle thickness or the glass thickness, so your leaves would not be able to poke out, obviously, but not only just that, they would not be able to, for example, touch the glass. They would be either bending or squishing along that invisible glass thickness line. Now I feel like mine might be too squished actually, so I'm just going to, very easy because it is on a separate layer, use my arrow tool to move that branch, which is going to give me a little bit more space to have slightly less squished leaves. And then otherwise, again, just filling everything in. If you're using Procreate, you can select the continue filling option here at the top instead of dragging and dropping onto all the leaves. So once you have that selected, you can just tap on the leaves to fill in the different sections. And once more, taking the time to refine the shape as you go. And as mentioned, I also want to add some leaves in the very front, so just going back on that leaves layer that I created that are above the monster. And these leaves, I want them to be kind of long and not attached to a branch, so that's exactly what I'm going to do, just these long oval shapes. Again, making sure I'm following this invisible line on the edge, but otherwise drawing something very simple. If you are enjoying this tutorial so far, please consider helping the channel by giving this video a like and subscribing if you haven't already. Now, I know everyone on YouTube is asking you to do that, but believe it or not, it does help us and our channels a lot because it just tells YouTube to take the video and show it to more people. So thanks for helping. And if you're struggling to see some of those leaves in the front because of the branch, just go ahead and temporarily hide the branch layer. So you can just uncheck the check mark or lower the opacity, whatever works for you. But just to make sure that you can, yes, see these branches on the left side really well. Or these leaves, sorry. Now, if some are not exactly where you want them to be, you always have the option to use a selection tool. So in Procreate, this option right here at the top, to draw a selection around some of your shapes. And then using any tool that you have that allows you to move shapes around, like the arrow tool, and, well, moving the shapes around to reposition them as desired. Now the last little elements I'm going to add are actually these glowing particles. I don't know what they would be, but they look magical, so I'm definitely going to add them. If you're drawing a winter wonderland, you could have snowflakes instead, but I recommend having some sort of particle in your piece, again, just to make it feel a little bit more whimsical. So these particles, again, we're going to draw them on a separate layer. This layer is going to be above everything we have so far except for the bottle. And we're going to rename that layer to particles. And for these particles, we're just going to go back to pure white, nothing super complicated, same brush, but quite a bit smaller so that you can draw small particles. And you're just going to disperse them around the piece. You want to have some big ones, some small ones, some medium ones. And you probably want to keep them in clusters. So you don't want to have something that looks too uniform. You want to make sure it looks a little bit random. And for that, what I like to do is draw them in groups of usually 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 1 big single one, kind of like this, but usually really keeping them in clusters. I find that looks a little bit more interesting than if it was too well organized or if it looked too much like a pattern. So feel free to pause the video here if you need a little bit more time to work on your basic shapes. Again, trust the process at this stage. If it looks just very bland and boring, that is totally normal. Once we're done mapping out the basic shapes, we're going to meet up in the next chapter and we're going to start adding details, which is really going to help the whole piece. Great, so now that we have all the basic elements mapped out, we're going to come back in and add the details to make the piece look a little bit more interesting, which is going to be very easy because right now it is super boring. And for the details, we're going to switch to a brush that has a little bit more texture to it, so the piece starts having that texture that is going to make it really interesting in the end. For that, you have a few options, of course. If you're working with free Procreate brushes, what I recommend doing is going in the sketching pack that comes with the app and picking either the HB or 6B pencil. That is a personal preference. I think I would personally go with the HB pencil, but again, you can experiment with both and see what you prefer. If you're working in different software, anything that has pencil in the name should work really well. Really, the goal here is to find a brush that has some texture within it, of course, but also allows you to be quite precise. So you don't want something too soft or too big. You want something pretty crisp, but a little bit textured. Now, if you do have my illustration bundle, we are going to go in the texture pack once more. And here, honestly, you have a few options. You could work with the everything brush if you want, because it is, after all, the everything brush. It works for pretty much all the steps. But what I would recommend doing here is either picking the sketching brush or the outlines brush. I think in most of my videos for the details, I actually use the outlines brush. But for this one, I want something a little bit softer and a little bit smoother. So I'm actually going to pick the sketching brush for the details. And here, all we're going to do is go back on all the different layers that we have, Probably starting with the monster because right now it's just so boring, so I cannot wait to make it more interesting. And we are going to outline the shapes with a darker version of the base color we used. Now the exact color doesn't matter at all, so I'm not even going to add the Xcode, but essentially we would just want a darker version, again, of that base color. I just said that. I'm going to give you an example first with the monster, and then we're just going to go through all the different layers and all the different elements. So just color picking that base color, opening the color selector, and manually making it quite a bit darker and maybe a little bit more saturated as well. The exact final color doesn't matter, it's always just a good idea to test it out, make sure there's enough contrast. It is a personal preference, don't agonize over it, it doesn't matter. As long as you're able to see it, that's all that matters, really. And same thing with the brush size here, there's no one right or wrong answer. It is going to depend on a few factors like the brush you're using, of course, the canvas size you're using, as well as your personal preference and how big or small you want the details to be. So the best way to go here is just testing the brush and changing the size until you find something that you like. And if you are working with Procreate, once you do find a brush size that you like, what you can do is just tap on the brush selector where the size is, tap on that, and then just tap on the plus that appears right here, which is essentially going to save the brush size. So if you were to change it either by accident or to draw something else, you would always have that little mark to go back to, which means you're going to be able to keep your details and outlines consistent. Now, one detail you don't want to add yet, though, is the facial features. Those we're going to draw them on a separate layer so that we can move them around if needed. But otherwise, you can go over all of your different layers and adding just darker version of the base color as outlines. And you can add extra details like you're going to see on my leaves. I'm going to add a vein in the middle and maybe secondary veins as well. On the dirt, I'm going to add little dots for rocks. So whatever you want to add in terms of details, you would go ahead and do that now. Now, while you're working on that, let's talk a little bit about the giveaway. So there's going to be one winner in this video who's going to win my illustration course, Illustration from Scratch, as well as one brush set of their choice from my store. Now, the way to enter is the same as usual. It's very simple. All you have to do is stick around in the video until you find the secret password, which is very easy to find because it's just going to show up on the screen and I'm going to write secret password above it, so nothing super complicated there. And then taking the secret password, writing it down in the comments of this video as well as on Instagram. And because there is a brush set to win, also adding in the comments, so the secret password, but also which brush set you would like to win. Now, all the details on how to enter, the dates, and the different prizes you can win are going to be in the video description, so make sure you check that out. Now, once you have all your elements outlined, we're going to move back into adding the facial features on the monster. Now, this video actually was inspired by a few different things, and I do want to mention them to give credit where credit is due. I was looking through my tutorials, seeing which one people seem to have really liked and which one people got great results from, and one of them was the floating ghost animation that I did a couple years ago, actually. And so I thought, I'm going to add a little ghost in the bottle. And so initially the monster was this floating little white thing, which looked really cute, but I'm feeling colorful these days. I say as I'm just wearing a black shirt, of course, but I'm feeling colorful in my illustrations. So I decided to add a bit of color to the character, turned it into more of a blobby monster that still has the same kind of facial features as that ghost, but has a bit more of a kawaii feel, and also really reminded me of the monsters, or illustrations I guess, that one of my favorite artists paints. Her name is Ellie versus Bear, or Ellie vs Bear. I'll actually add her Instagram in the video description if you want to check it out, because this little guy really reminded me of her art, so I do want to give her a shout out. If you do like this piece, you're probably going to like her art as well. So anyway, all that to say, once we do have the outlines, we're going to come back in and add the facial features on the monster. As you can see, this is something you can completely customize to bring it to your own style. Now I'm going to go with, again, the same style I used for the little floating ghost, which was these two round little eyes and a very simple mouth in the middle with two very simple arms folded in front of the body and shy little cheeks. No matter what you want to draw for the facial features, just go ahead and draw them on a separate layer so that you can move them around if needed. So a new layer above the monster layer, renaming that new layer to facial features. And here, so they really pop from everything else, we're actually going to use pure black. Otherwise, we're going to stick with the exact same brush, and again, you can draw whatever you want. So you could have cute little closed eye like this with a cute little mouth. You could have more peaceful eyes, so just the inverted curve, so a U shape instead of the bridge shape, and still a little cute mouth. But as I mentioned, I'm going to go with very small, round, fully black eyes. And a nice, long, slightly curved, smiley mouth that covers pretty much the entire space between both eyes. I don't know why, but this kind of smiley face makes me so happy, and it actually reminds me of, you know, in Pokemon, the Ditto. Whenever it transforms into another Pokemon, the Pokemon that it's transformed into always has that kind of dumb little facial feature or facial expression, and I just love it so much. This is what I'm going to go for roughly, but you could have something completely different if you want. It's very simple. You can just tweak a few things and completely transform your piece once more. And don't forget that if you need to use the eraser, change it to the brush you're using for your details, so a pencil kind of brush. If you do have my illustration bundle though, there is an eraser shape, so this is what I would recommend using instead of the sketching brush. And once you have the feature mapped out, don't hesitate, because again, they are on a separate layer, to use any kind of selection tool to move them around and experiment with the facial features. They're probably the most important thing we're going to draw in the whole piece, so it is worth taking the time to try a few different things and seeing which kind of configuration and which kind of shapes you prefer. Now, honestly, I'm really quite happy with that. So once we have the facial feature, we're going to come back in and add even more details on the different layers, but instead of being darker versions of the base color, this time we're going to go with pure white details to add extra glow and highlights. Now, once more, I'm going to go back on the monster layer. Here, just picking pure white for everything, so it's going to be very easy. And instead of outlining everything this time, we're only going to add a line of light on the top right of every shape. So for example here, a nice little white line. And as you can see, it's going to really help the elements pop from each other. And on top of that line of light that outlines the shape, we're also going to use white to add, or at least I'm also going to use white to add the arms of the character. So just very simple, I guess rounded triangle or rounded bean shape. Not exactly like that, maybe a little bit lower. But very simple folded arms. I think it just makes the character look so cute. And to make it look a little bit shy, I'm also going to zoom in and add some little squiggles under the eyes that are going to look like shy cheeks. So once more, I'm going to stop talking to let you focus on adding those lines of light on the top right of all your different elements. Now, one thing you might consider though is on the character itself, so on your monster itself, if you want to make it look a little bit more shiny and a little bit more transparent, what you can do is add some extra highlights that you're not going to add on the other elements. The first ones being little dots on the top right. So probably 3 that are slightly different sizes. Maybe 3 on this side as well, because in my case there is this glowing light right above the monster, so we can imagine that it would be shiny on the monster, pretty close to that. So 3 more, but slightly smaller ones under this glowing light. And to emphasize the glowy and the transparency, you might actually draw an oval at the bottom of the monster. So just following the outline you have, and then just closing the oval like this. Otherwise, once more, just go over all the different layers you have, add that highlight on the top right, and then we're going to meet up for the next step. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave me a comment telling me which color you're using to draw your monster. And I know it might seem surprising at first, but the secret password does a lot of things for the channel and for you as well. So in videos like this one where there's a giveaway, the secret password is your key to enter the giveaway, so that's good. But even on days where there are no giveaways, the secret password is still very helpful because, believe it or not, it does give me a lot of insight into how to edit and paste my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you. So again, if you've watched this far, just leave me a comment below telling me which color you're using for your monster, and then we're going to keep going. Okay, so now that we have the details mapped out, we're going to actually work on the glass jar to make it look like glass and also to make the piece look a whole lot more magical because it's going to start glowing. So the first thing we're going to do here is just create a new layer above the bottle, and we're going to rename that new layer to Lights. And here, still with white, still with the same brush we've been using, but maybe a little bit bigger, we're going to start by outlining the shape that we have for the bottle. Now, one thing you're going to notice when we get to the top, right now it looks like the stopper is behind the bottle, which is definitely not what we want. So we're going to add a bit of a curve around the stopper that is arched downwards and also kind of wrap around the edges of the stoppers. And once you do have that line around the stopper, before we move on to finishing the outlines, we're going to go back on the bottle layer itself. And with our eraser, we are going to erase the part of the bottle that is essentially above that little line that we just drew. Great. Now from there you can go back on your lights layer and just keep outlining the bottle. Now if there is a neck on your bottle, you might actually want to outline it as well, but maybe not having that line touch the very edges of the neck, maybe just focusing it towards the middle. Great! So once you're done with your outline, we're actually going to change either the opacity or the blending mode of this light layer, depending on what you have available in your software, so that the outlines are not solid white, but are going to depend or change based on what is behind them. Now, blending modes are usually with the opacity of your layers. So in Procreate, it is very easy to find. Again, if you just tap on the little N next to the check mark of one layer, you get, like I mentioned earlier, the opacity slider. And then right underneath, you're going to see this huge list with a bunch of weird names. These are blending modes. So the goal here is just finding a blending mode that is going to look a little bit better than pure white. So it should transform your outlines into a lighter, brighter, more saturated version of your background. So you can just scroll through the list and see if there's something you like. Now, I personally know I'm going to go with overlay, but something like soft light could work really well too. I just really like overlay for this, so this is what I'm going to go with. And once you have that layer set to overlay, we're going to come back in and add some extra highlights on top of the glass. So same brush, same color, but just a bigger version of your brush. And then following the shape of your bottle, whatever that shape is, but just giving it a little bit of a gap on the side. You're going to do that on both sides. And you're going to do that on the neck if you have one as well. Now on the left side, go ahead and add another one of those lines, focusing this time on the bottom half of the bottle. And then you might go ahead and either lower the opacity of your brush. So if you're working with Procreate, it is this slider right here under the size, probably lowering it around 40, 50%, 60%, doesn't need to be exact. Or you're going to press very lightly on your brush. And we're going to accentuate the top section of the bottle. So if you have a round bottle, you're going to draw a downwards curve. If you have more of a square bottle, you're just going to draw a straight line. So kind of like this, but then we're going to thicken the edges to essentially create these kind of triangles. Great. Now, once you have that mapped out, go back to your layer and just play with the opacity until you find something that you like. I think I'm going to lower mine probably around, let's go with 65%, but that is totally a personal preference. Just experiment with different things. And then we're going to come back in and add highlights on top of everything that are going to be much brighter. So go ahead and create a new layer on top of everything. Rename that new layer to highlights. For now, leave the blending mode as normal, the opacity at 100%, same brush, same color, maybe a bit smaller than what we just used. And we are going to reinforce some parts of the lights that are already there. So I'm going to reinforce the top right because that's what we have as the highlights within the bottle. So we're going to do the same thing on the bottle itself. So, oh, bringing the opacity back up to 100%. Totally forgot about that. Super important. But yeah, otherwise just reinforcing the top right first. Oops. Sorry for the whistling, it just got a delivery and that woke up my dog Waffle. I think she's gonna want to come and hang out, so I'll go get her and I'll keep going. So here's the little polar bear waking up from your nap. So if you hear any more whistling or barking in the video, it's her. I'm sorry. We'll try to keep going, but yeah, just want to let you know. Great, so once you have the top right outline, we're also going to outline a little bit of the bottom left because right now it is just kind of disappearing and that's not a look. And also because this is glass, there would be reflection between the different sides. So something very simple like this. Maybe accentuating the bottom corners if you have them. Just like that. And then once more, maybe making your brush a little bit bigger and lowering your opacity a little bit. And reinforcing some of these lights that we have, again, mostly on the top right and the bottom left. And just like we did for the regular lights, once you have your highlights mapped out, you can go back to your layer options and changing the blending mode. Again, you want something bright, so what could we use for that? Maybe color dodge? No, maybe add. Actually, I think overlay is still my favorite. Yeah, I think I'll go with overlay again. Might lower the opacity of the regular lights now that we have the highlights. There we go. Now to make the bottle look a little bit more like glass, we're also going to add reflections on the back side of the bottle. So go ahead and create a new layer below everything you have and rename that new layer to reflections. Now we're actually going to give a bit of a color to these reflections, which is going to help us with the glow in the very last chapter of this video. And here I recommend picking the exact same color you're using for your monster for the glow, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to color pick my monster. If you want to experiment with a different color, that is okay. Make sure it is really quite bright though, because after all, it should be light, so it should be bright. Otherwise, same brush, still with lower opacity. I think we're going to experiment with that first. We're going to go ahead and just draw random shapes in this top to middle section of the bottle. So really in this little area right here. Once more, if you are working with a bottle that is curved, you're going to have the same downwards curve. If you are working with a bottle that is straight, you would have just a straight band all the way across. And really here the shapes can be whatever. But make sure that they're not going right to the edge because again, we do have that glass thickness. Something like that. Gorgeous, I know. And then you can come back in with the eraser and just add even more details within the base shapes. So maybe a line there, a couple there. Something like that. And once more, once you do have those reflections mapped out, feel free to just go back and play with the opacity of your layer. I feel like mine are a little bit too dark, well, quite a bit too dark. So I'm just going to lower the opacity, probably around 60% for now. So the piece is really starting to come together, but the last couple steps are really what's going to bring it from cool to pretty awesome. So the next thing we're going to do is adding some gradients within the different pieces just to make them pop a little bit more and also make the piece feel less flat. And in the final chapter, we're going to really amp up everything, bring everything to life by adding a glow around the bottle, as well as a few different, well, light and shadows effects. That being said, for now, like I mentioned, we're going to start by adding a bit of gradients in the different pieces and a bit of texture. So I'm going to start with the monster because, well, it's the most interesting piece. And once more, this is something we're going to do on all the different layers, but I'm going to start with the monster just to show you essentially what you're looking for. So go ahead and select your monster layer. And if you are working in Procreate, I'm going to show you a really cool technique that makes it very easy and quick. If you are working in different software, what you can do is just color pick the base color you use for any shape that you're working on at that point. Make it a little bit darker, because we're going to start with the shadows, and also change the hue of it a tiny little bit. So for example, for your shadows, you could move your hue towards the right. So instead of having this aqua blue this time, I would have more of a purple blue. And then when we go back to add the lights, just color picking once more the lights, but this time moving towards the opposite side, so the left, to have even more of a turquoise blue. But for now, again, I'm just going to show you with the shadows. So just darker, bit more purple. And here we're going to pick a brush that has a lot of grit to it, but that is a little bit softer and a little bit bigger than just a pencil brush. So anything that has charcoal in the name would probably be a good option. If you don't have a charcoal brush, just look for something that has some grittiness, some texture within it, but is not too rough or not too soft. So just something pretty basic, honestly. If you're working with Procreate, a really good option would be going in the charcoal pack that comes with the app. If I can find it right here, charcoals. And honestly, all of those options, except for the burnt tree, would work really well. I think the willow charcoal is my favorite. But as you can see, it's kind of a brush that has this sort of little grit within it. And then you would just take that brush and add your shadows on the opposite side of where your lights are. So we added the lights on the top right, so all your shadows would be on the bottom left. And again, as I mentioned, you would just come back in, color pick the base color once more, this time making it lighter and more saturated, and shifting the hue towards the opposite side of what you just did. So in my case, going with more of a bright teal color, or bright turquoise color. So again, this is the option if you do not have Procreate. If you have Procreate, we're going to use a technique that is way faster and quite a bit easier. So I'm just going to undo everything. So making sure we have the monster layer selected and making sure we actually pick the same kind of brush. So either the willow charcoal if you're working with the free brush options, or if you do have my illustration bundle in the texture pack, the basic texture brush or the shader, both would work really well. But instead of color picking and painting with the colors, we're going to paint with a filter. Now, if you're familiar with my tutorials, you probably know which one I'm about to use. It is in the adjustment panel here at the top, and it is called Hue, Saturation, and Brightness. But instead of using the technique that I pretty much always use, especially in the watercolor videos, which is creating a selection and then feathering that selection and adding a gradient that way, because we want to build texture, we're going to switch this option here at the top from layer to pencil. And that is going to allow us to paint the selection that we want instead. And because we picked a brush that has some texture, the selection is going to have texture as well. So you're probably going to go with a fairly big brush size here. Again, the exact brush size doesn't matter. For now, you can just leave the settings to whatever Procreate gave you first. And we're going to start by painting on the bottom left of our character, just like I did in the example for the other software. And then we're just going to change the hue and the brightness through that to create our gradient and our texture. So I'm going to go with a really nice pink purple for my shadows, making it, well, darker because it is a shadow, but otherwise keeping the saturation probably the same. Yeah. So I'm going to go with something like this. And the beautiful thing with using this technique is that because we drew the details on the same layer as our base shape, when we create that selection and that gradient, the details are also going to be affected by this. So you can see the details on this side are much more purple than the details on this side. And another really great thing about this technique is that you can erase as you go. So while you are in this hue, saturation, and brightness selector, if you go ahead and use the eraser, I'm just going to make sure it is set to the proper brush. Eraser shape, that'll do, but you could pick again the willow charcoal. You could go in and erase the filter, essentially, erase the effect without erasing the base color. Now be careful though, the second you exit that menu or that hue selection brightness tool, if you go in and erase, it's going to erase everything. So make sure before you exit and move on to the next step, you're really happy with your gradient. So I'm going to go with this, but we're going to repeat this step a bunch of times for the different elements, of course, but a bunch of times within one element to add as much of an interesting gradient, texture, color variation, however you want to call it, as possible. So I added a bit of a shadow at the bottom. Now I'm going to go back and add the light at the top. So going back in the adjustment panel, picking hue, saturation, and brightness, making sure we have the pencil option selected. It's a bit annoying. I think we have to select it every time. There might be an option to set it as default pencil, but that's not what I have at least. And then this time, instead of painting the bottom left, I'm going to paint the top right. And in here, it's pretty good hue in the sense that I want to go on the opposite side. So instead of adding purple, pink, I want to add a bit of green. But it is not bright enough because these are lights. So I'm going to increase the brightness quite a lot. And maybe play with the saturation. Oh yeah, I like that. And I think I'm going to come back in one more time because this is the monster, it is the focal element. I want to make sure it is super interesting. So I'm just going to come back in, hue, saturation, and brightness, picking the pencil option. I'm going to go back in and reinforce my shadow. I feel like it's not dark enough. So I'm just going to paint over maybe a smaller section this time. Really the very far bottom left edge. Making it quite a bit darker. And changing the hue towards, again, it's more of a purpley pink color. That's way too dark though. Now once more, I'm going to stop talking to let you focus on adding your own gradients on the different elements that you have. One thing to keep in mind though is when you change the hue to add your shadows and your lights, try to change it so that the shadows are all going towards the same direction. So for example, on my monster, I went towards the right to add more purple, more blue to my shadows. And then for the lights, I went towards the left to add a bit more yellow and more green. So just try to keep that coherent so that your lights and shadows have a bit of, well, coherence. Otherwise, again, we're just going to go through all the different elements that are within the bottle. So not the bottle itself, really just the decorations, and we're going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to give you one more example. I'm going to pick the leaves right here. Adjustment panel at the top, hue, saturation, and brightness, pencil option. I'm going to start with the lights, so just painting on the top right of my elements. Making it brighter because it's the lights, and shifting my color towards the left because this is the direction I've been using for my lights in general, so adding more yellow, orange. Maybe increasing the saturation a little bit. Yeah, something like that. And then repeating for the shadows, so still hue, saturation, and brightness. Pencil tool. This time painting on the bottom left. Shifting the hue towards the opposite side, which for me, I was adding more blue, purple to my shadows. And lowering the brightness to create, well, shadows. Oh, if you're still watching, one element that is going to be different is the stopper, because in my mind the light is coming from the monster itself, from the vase. So instead of being the bottom left where the shadows are and the top right where the lights are, it's going to be inverted because the lights are coming from the bottom in case of the stopper. So you're going to add your lights on the bottom of the stopper, and then this top plain flat part of the stopper is going to be the shadow. So once more, feel free to pause the video here if you need more time to work on your texture ingredients. And once you're done with that, we're going to meet in the final chapter, which is going to be making everything glow, adding some shadows, or as I like to say, making everything pop. Okay, so the first glowing element we're going to add is these little glowing particles, because right now they're kind of boring. So what we're going to do here is we're going to duplicate the particle layer we have, creating a copy. Now to do that in Procreate, very easy. All you have to do is swipe your layer towards the left with one finger and selecting duplicate. And for now, we're going to hide the top copy and select the bottom copy. Now the bottom copy, just to make it a little bit easier to follow along, if you want, you can rename it to Particles Glow. And once more here, we're going to color pick the base color we use for the monster, somewhere roughly in the middle of the monster. You don't want to pick the highlight or you don't want to pick the shadow, so roughly in the middle. And you're going to color drop that onto your particles to recolor them. Now, if you're working in Procreate, you're probably going to need to do what I just did, which is adjusting the threshold. So when you first drop onto your color, it's very possible that it's just going to fill one particles. If you move your pencil towards the right, you should be able to fill all the particles. Now, when you do move your pencil towards the right, it is possible that it fills in the entire screen. If that's the case, just move it towards the left a little bit until it only fills in the particles. Now from there, if it is available to you, we're going to use a blending mode to make the particles glow even more. If it is not available to you, don't worry about it. So once more, you can just scroll through the list until you find something you like. I think I'm going to go with add for this because I want everything to be super, super bright. And then we're going to add some blur to make the glow effect. But before that though, go ahead and reactivate the particles layer so that we see what we're doing. And making sure you still have the particle glow layer selected. Go ahead and find any blur you have in your software. So usually you would find something called Gaussian blur. That would be the best option, but really anything that has blur should work totally fine here. In Procreate, it is in the adjustment panel here at the top. You can see we have Gaussian blur in this second section of the menu. So you can just select that. And then swiping your finger towards the right will add blur, and towards the left will reduce the blur. Now we don't want to add too much blur, otherwise we won't see any difference. So probably something around 9%. And if, like me, you feel like your glow is really pale, you can't barely see it, you can just duplicate your particle glow layer a few times until it is the brightness level that you want. So again, just swiping it towards the left with one finger and tapping duplicate until you're really happy with the glow. I think I'm going to create 3 layers. And if, like me, you do have a bunch of copies and you really want to be a bit more precise with what you're doing, you can just go ahead and play with different blending modes between the copies. I'm kind of going off script here, but why not? I know I really like blending with color dodge, but right now it looks quite boring, so maybe not. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep my top copy, or set my top copy to pin light. Now we're also going to add a glow around the vase itself. And so for that, we're going to keep the same color, but we might make it a little bit darker and a little bit more saturated. Again, the exact color doesn't matter, but I feel like mine was a little bit too bright, so it should be at least middle of the way in terms of brightness, so on the darker side. And honestly, you could probably go with almost fully saturated. So something kind of like that, but again, nothing super precise. So from there, we're going to add a glow around the vase itself. So go ahead and create a new layer below everything we have so far. Rename that new layer to Vase Glow. And here we're going to make sure that whatever color we're using, again, it's going to depend on your little monster here, is going to be a bit darker and a little bit more saturated than this very bright grayish color. So the exact color doesn't matter, but you want to make sure it is probably almost fully bright and almost fully saturated. Something kind of in that realm should work really well. And here with the same either charcoal or texture brush, we're just going to draw around the vase, so on the outside. And here, as you can see, it can be very loose. It doesn't need to be precise in any way. And if you have blur available to you in your software, again, we can add a bit of blur just to make the glow effect a little bit softer. If you don't, you're just going to have to work on your gradient a little bit more so that it is a little bit softer than what we have right now. Otherwise, again, if you have blur, just go back to whatever blurring option you have. In Procreate, it is in the adjustment panel here at the top, the Gaussian blur option, and adding as much or as little blur as you want. I think I'm going to go with 58%. Now we're also going to add a bit of a glow under the bottle to make it look like it's resting on some sort of a surface. So create a new layer right above the vase glow, but below everything else. And rename that new layer to table glow. And here we're going to use the exact same color and the same brush, just quite a bit smaller this time. And we're going to draw kind of a donut shape so that there is a bit of a shadow really close to the vase itself, because if we look at what we have in the vase, if the monster is what is glowing, or if the light is coming from the vase, wherever that is actually, there is a bit of a something on the ground. So either snow or dirt, whatever you're drawing, which means the light is not going to be able to reach right under the vase. So yeah, we're going to draw the light as more of a ring than a full oval shape. And once more here, you can go ahead and add some blur, although you don't want to overdo it because you want to still keep that little ring in the middle, so be very careful when you add your blur. I'm probably going to go with 16%, but it is a little bit too bright in my case. I'm just going to come back in and lower the opacity of that table glow layer quite a lot, honestly, probably around, let's go with 57%. Now I have this little thing here that I don't know where it's from. I'm going to try to find it on my layers and erase it because it's driving me crazy. Ah, there we go. And I feel like I erased a little bit too much of my ring, so I'm actually going to go back on my table glow layer with my eraser and erase a little bit of it just to bring it back. Maybe refining the shape as well. Oh yeah, that's much better. Now we're also going to add a bit of a gradient in the background because we added a bunch of gradients within the piece. If there's none in the background, I think it's just a bit weird. So for that, just go ahead and create a new layer under everything you have so far. Rename that new layer to background gradient. Oh boy. And starting from the base color we've been using for the glow elements, shift towards one side. This side really doesn't matter here. I'm going to go with more of a purplish pink because I feel like I have some of that in my monster and it's going to look pretty cool. I'm going to go with that. Maybe making it a little bit brighter. Why not? Let's just experiment. Once more, there's really no right or wrong way to do this at this point. We're just adding a few elements to make the piece more interesting. And we're going to brush that color on the top left of the piece. Again, just to create a gradient. And once more, we're going to add some blur to blend in it a little bit better. So adjustment panel, Gaussian blur, and then adding as much or as little blur as you want. And then the last thing we're going to do here is add a bit of a vignette effect to focus the eye towards the important part of the piece, so the middle of the piece. Now that vignette effect, we're going to put it above everything we have so far. Now I know I have a lot of layers, but that's what happens when we add glow effects. It creates a bunch of layers, so sorry about that. But yeah, creating a new one above everything we have so far, renaming that new layer to vignette. And for the vignette, we're just going to color pick somewhere in the bottom part of our background, so somewhere that doesn't have any of that new gradient we're adding. So I guess I'm going to go with this. And we're just going to draw very quickly over the corners of the piece. Doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to add a gradient once more. So very simple like this. And we're also going to use a blending mode, this time a blending mode that makes the color darker. So in Procreate, anything at the top of the list honestly would work really well. So maybe linear burn, color burn, or multiply. I'm not sure what I'm going to go with. I think I'm going to use multiply, very basic one. It's in pretty much every single software, so it should be very easy to find. And then we're going to finish this up by adding some blur to our vignette, just like we did for everything else. Now I do feel like mine is way too dark, so I'm just going to lower the opacity of it quite a bit, probably around 29%, and maybe erasing in that top corner. I feel like it's a little bit too much. So I'm just going to very gently erase it. There we go. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn how to draw a colorful portrait, I highly recommend you check out this tutorial because I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it step by step. And it's a very similar technique to what we did here, so if you were able to do this, you can for sure draw the portrait as well. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.